Yes, should I start?
हाँ बेटा, start.
Okay, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Nagwan Singh. I would like to welcome all of you on behalf of our head, Professor Seema Baba, and the History Department. Today's talk will be chaired by Professor Raziuddin Akhil. Today we have Professor Farhat Nasreen. She will be going to speak on her recent book, The Great Mughals. Dr. Farhat Nasreen is Professor of History and Honorary Director of the Center for Jawaharlal Nehru Studies, Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. Professor Nasreen is the editor of the journal History and Sociology of South Asia, Sage Publications. Professor Nasreen has published 6 books and many papers from reputed national and international publication houses. Her book, If History Has Taught Us Anything, has been converted into an audiobook as well. Her latest book, The Great Mughals, presents an engrossing saga of one of the greatest dynasties of the world, the Sultanate Mughaliya. So thank you so much, Professor Nasreen, for being with us. And for listeners, please feel free to ask your questions to the chat box. They all will be forwarded to Professor Nasreen after she will deliver her lecture. So without further ado, I would like to invite Raji sir. Over to you, sir.
So let me quickly also welcome Professor Farhat Nasreen, Apa, and Salam and Adabars. We were just thinking that as a historian and professor in the university in Jamia Millia, we are doing a great work of disseminating current research to a larger readership with a whole series of books that you are publishing from Rupa Publishing House. I think these 2 have already been published, and maybe another should be forthcoming in the near future. So I understand, as Nagwant also announced, that you will be presenting today parts of your new book, The Great Mughals, which is published by Rupa only. And I don't know how, but I have got a copy. And so let me sort of launch it before our colleagues here and students here. This is the book, very neatly produced book in over 230-40 pages. Very interesting narrative. And I must say that it is important to publish books for wide general reading, works written by serious historians who are professors in the university. Otherwise, what is happening is that many people are writing books today with no or little training in historical research, and they're selling in large numbers and also styling themselves as big historians on social media. So then perhaps we in the academics are boring people, whereas all these stylish people are all over as top historians. But we also understand that the publications of this kind that that has comes out of experience of years of research and teaching, etc., and therefore it has its own substance, and it's a different proposition altogether. So then, without spending more time, I'll say that we are welcome you to speak, and the whole afternoon is there for you to present the whole Mughlai, roast, as it were. So please, maybe you can begin your lecture now.
Thank you so much. I hope I'm audible clearly.
Yes.
Okay, right. So thank you, Professor Baba, for having me over. Thank you, Razi. Thank you to the seminar committee, Delhi University History Department, for inviting me over for this talk. I'm truly grateful for this opportunity. Now, we are here to talk about the Mughals. And when you think about the Mughals, you think that there's already so much said and done about them, that what is the new thing that you may listen in this talk. Now, there's a bit that I would like to first talk about, why we need to revisit, or maybe kind of go back and keep going back to certain spaces in history, because they have more to offer than anyone may have picked up in 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 goes, because there's so much to it, and there are so many fine threads which run through the passage of time, that there might be a thread or 2 which someone may have missed out, which you can always go back to and have a look at it. The other thing is that we all may see different things in the same history, in the same narrative, because we look at it differently. So that all of that makes it very important. If we think that history is something which is once a subject is talked about, it's done and dusted, then it's taking history too casually, because every event in history has something to leave for the present, because otherwise history makes no sense. If it is not useful for making choices today, then it is not something which is very useful and that we may indulge in it with so much of seriousness as we do. So it is important. The other thing is that there is a lot of stereotyping, especially when you're talking about, like this is a dynasty, there is essentially a continuity in it. So, but then within that continuity, there are not repetitive patterns, because you find that the personalities of the rulers differ, their policies differ, their circumstances differ. Sometimes there are things which are in their control, and sometimes you find that the things are simply beyond their control. But then those figures are they're used by the later historians and by the later narratives, or maybe sometimes politicians, to their advantage. So therefore we need to also understand that histories, and also histories typically of groups or dynasties or communities, should be brought out of being stereotyped or being put into a particular niche or a particular group. So we need to see that the theoretical patterns may not be repetitive in each case of the various components of a group or a community or a dynasty for that matter, which definitely is the case with the Mughals, which we will see in a bit. The other thing is, which of course the history of the Mughals or any other history of any grand dynasty or grand personalities tells us, is that humility is a lesson which is one of the basic lessons of history. Because when you look at the grandeur of the Mughal Empire to begin with, I mean, you find that it's absolutely fantastic. You talk about their buildings, you talk about the way their palaces were made and managed. It's absolutely royal. It's just beyond imagination. And then when you think of their collapse, you think of their dissemination, and you think of the way that they vanished, and the way then when the newer generations come and how they revisit them, and how their policies or their personalities are re-evaluated by the coming generations, and how sometimes they completely broken down into pictures and into images which may not have been there at all. So therefore humility, I think, is a very big lesson that we draw, not just from history but also from the history of the Mughals in particular, because of its hugeness and then the way they come down to dust, literally. Then the other interesting thing that also we must learn, especially from the story of Babar, jiske bare mein abhi we are going to talk in a bit, is this, that we may have grand ideas. I mean, human beings are largely intelligent, and there are a lot of dreams that we can have in our heads, but it takes a lot of hard work to transmute those dreams into realities. Now, amongst these Mughal emperors, in their own stories, you would find that there are a couple of them who had certain dreams and they were able to transmute those dreams into a reality. So it's always a possibility. And that is something that especially you will see in the Babarnama when we talk about it. The other big thing, which is very prominent when we talk about the Mughals, is Akbar and his policy of the Sulh-e-Kul. And having said that, the idea that he wanted to take everyone together, and he's talking about a composite culture, talking about in a sense a political system, a working system where you take everybody along, and it's about inclusion, understanding the other, and so on and so forth. Now, the interesting bit, if you read world history and you look at the whole discourse of history, not just Hindustani, but the world over, not just the medieval, but again ancient, medieval, modern, all of it, then you will find that competition is one of the basic natures of human beings. Competition, being competitive, is one of our basic inherent nature. When we think of groups, you find that there might be individuals who are competitive, which you can, of course, relate to, understand, identify very easily in your life around you, So that's easy to do. And the other thing is that you can see competitiveness in groups, because sometimes individuals, especially if they are into leadership, then they might actually, mobilize groups. And so you have competition which is going on between groups. Then you might have competition between communities. You may have competition amongst regions, countries, races, and so on and so forth. So competition is a thing which you just cannot get rid of. No matter what you talk about, there is going to be competition. Because survival and doing well are things that we are somehow programmed to strive for. So we'll keep striving for that. The interesting part here is this, that cooperation can also be a strategy for competing. So it isn't as if that because you are competing, you will not cooperate with anybody. So there can be, cooperation can be used as a tool for competing. And so that is why you will find that there are groups, because then there are the people who are members of that particular group will be cooperating with each other because they want to compete with another group. The same kind of philosophy is floated amongst nations because they want to compete with another country or another nation. So now, having said this, if you think of the idea of bringing in inclusion of a number of groups in the Mughal, in the ministerial setup, in the the Mughal elite, especially in the period of Akbar, or even otherwise, I mean, not just his period, but wherever and whenever you find that there has been a cooperation, someone who's engineering cooperation, it might be for a certain kind of competition. So that is very interesting. So if we believe that competition is real, then cooperation is also real. If there are strategies for that, then there are strategies for this as well. And then, of course, there will be counter strategies. And if a particular element who's a part of this cooperativeness feels that this doesn't work for me anymore, they will drop out from that group and they look for some other alignment which works for them, because that is what competition is about. So if one kind of cooperation doesn't work, then there can be a shift. And that is something, again, that we will see. So therefore, since there is a shift, there is always a shift, because even in our personal careers, if we think that a certain thing is not working for us, or maybe in our life a certain thing is not working for us, we go in for a change. So we are always in a process of selection. So as far as the Mughals as a dynasty are concerned, or the individual rulers are concerned, they too will go through a process of selecting people around them, or maybe selecting the policies which suit them the best. So that is a process which will constantly go on. The other thread also that we find running right through this period is the idea of groups competing with each other, and the idea of group protection. Typically in the period of Akbar, we find that you have this this group of the Muslim orthodoxy whom he is going to displace, and then you have this absolutely bewilderingly amazing account which comes from Abdul Qadir Badayuni, the Muntakhabut Tawari, which is going to cry about this shift, and how there is this particular group which feels somehow insecure, maybe. And when we come to Badayuni, we'll talk more about how Badayuni is perhaps not a part of any group, but he personally feels insecure, and that's how he would try to attach himself to the orthodoxy and create a narrative from that standpoint, because there he finds a place to at least stand. So that is something that is going to happen. So now we find that the general phenomena which follows this whole narrative is this, that it is very difficult for any ruling class to actually balance equality and liberty. Because when we judge the Mughals, especially when we judge them from a distance, when we are not maybe Abul Fazl, of course, is a chamcha, so you can forget about him, but maybe when even Abdul Qadir Badayuni or Nizamuddin Ahmad or the nearer historians, when they judge any of these guys, or when we judge them from today, we are judging them from a lot of distance. So we find we might judge them from our current parameters of what we think is the right thing to do is. Now, if you look again at the flow of history, you would find that the concept of morality, the idea of morality has always been there, but the things that define morality may change from time to time. Also, the idea of correctness of a certain thing might be good at one point in time, but it may just not be good at another point in time. For example, I'll just pick up an example. For example, it may be said, that women who were docile who would just stay at home, not ever step out. They were considered to be, the right kind of women at one point in time. That was the, the correct moral, according to the moral ethical standards of a certain time. They were the best kind of women. But this perception has changed. So therefore, the parameters which judge morality, which judge ethics, which judge the, the rationale that a particular group followed for taking certain kind of decisions, all those parameters keep changing with time. So it's very difficult to judge the past by present standards. So that is something that we really need not employ all the time, because everything which is considered to be a virtue might have been a sin at a particular point in time. So that keeps shifting. But as far as the basic idea of being good, the basic idea of being good, being moral, being ethical, those as a fundamental concept may remain static. But how we look at them and how we judge them, it changes with the perception, with the time, with the general scenario that surrounds around us. Now, in all of this, we find that religion, which again is a big deal. Whenever we are talking about any of these groups, and in fact, whenever you're talking about history, religion somehow would always crop up in the narrative in one way or the other, driving people to either align with each other or fight with each other, or in some way, Now, if you go back to the history of religion itself, you would find that the statesmen always found religion to be very useful in implementing the moral order, because it made the implementation of moral order very easy, because they would have the concept of hell and heaven. So it would deter at least some people from breaking the law of the state. So that was something which was always, it came in handy. And the other thing was that once the state realized the importance of religion in helping them in governing, then the priests who said that they could help in the implementation of a moral code and an ethical code and the law and order of the state with much more of ease, they almost became partners with the governing class. That is why you would find that when we talk about the Sultanate, the Sufis were important people, although they were never aligned with the state, maybe in so much of directness. Razi will be able to tell us about it in much more detail than what I know of. But they were nevertheless important as far as creation of a public opinion was concerned. Certainly they were important. And in Akbar's period, we find that suddenly, there is a change. Now, the change here is this, that he is trying to profess morality and ethics beyond the definition of any one particular religion. So he's talking about, a certain standard of morality that he wants his subjects to have, or maybe he himself professes that he has, which is not defined by any one religion. Now, this is something which will make, of course, the Muslim orthodoxy, who thought that they are going to help him in the implementation of, the ethics, morality, and the law of the state, they felt that they've been displaced. So it causes actually trouble. And so you have, that there is this whole change which will occur in the way the Mughal Badshah situates himself vis-a-vis the, with the religious elite, the orthodoxy and the theologians, and the riaya, the general people. So how are they situated? What is the kind of image that they are projecting, and so on and so forth. So he is promoting, like I said to you, morality beyond the boundaries of his own religion. That is something which is very, very important. And the other thing that he does, which is also very remarkable, is the extension of the boundaries of charity, again, beyond his religion. So extension of the boundaries of charity is something which is not just related to medieval period, because if you think about multiculturalism, and if you think about countries who made multiculturalism a policy of theirs, for them also it was a matter of concern whether the people who migrate to those lands, do they give charity to the locals from their earnings, or do they hold back charity because they feel that they actually don't belong here? So this I'm talking to you about the current times. So this extension of the line of, boundary of charity and extending it to everyone, the Mother Dimash land grants and so on and so forth, all that becomes a very important thing if you're looking at the the developments from a distance and you're looking at the larger picture of what is happening here. The other thing which, at least for Akbar, was important was, and in fact, we would see that to a certain extent, it was important to also Aurangzeb, surprisingly, is that there had to be, a balance between the power of the state and how much would the power of the state compromise to accommodate the orthodoxy, beyond which they will not compromise any further, and up to which level will they go down to please the orthodoxy, and beyond that they would not, they would not do anything. I mean, they would just let go of the orthodoxy and then handle them very differently, or maybe even if it leads to confrontations which might grow into even military confrontations, they're ready for doing any of those things. The other thing which you find that most of the Mughals implemented was that they were much into private judgments of a situation rather than taking a group judgment or going by a stereotype. That is something that you will find right from Babar onwards, because all of them have their own whimsical personalities, good or bad, but they are of a type. And that is again something which is very interesting, because they all then have they leave behind a mark of their own. So it isn't as if that you say that, well, this is the Mughal dynasty and then you have these rulers and they were all of the same type. They're not of the same type, they're all very different. The other important thing which we need to remember consistently is this, that the Muslims of Hindustan particularly, who are not so very familiar with what the history of the Mughals was, who were the Turs, what was the Sultanate about, what was going on inside, the palaces, and what was the real, the personal morality or ethics or religiosity or the Islamiyat of these people, who do not know about them. Sometimes they identify with the Mughal rulers as, some kind of ID, or the Mughal state to be some kind of a grand historical past, which was very fancy. That is also something that we need to kind of revisit and see whether that was true. So these guys are people. They are not demigods. They are not perfect. So then who are they? They're like ordinary people. So we look at their ordinariness and we approach and see what were their emotions like, what was their value system like, because every Muslim will not have the same kind of a value system. Therefore, you at no point can get into a logical groove or, a stereotype as far as these fellows are concerned. To begin with Babar. Now we find that Babar, as a child, when I heard of the Babarnama, I heard that, it is something which is very inspiring, and I used to think that this is impossible. I mean, the autobiography or some Bacha can definitely not inspire one to do anything. And but when I read it, and especially when I read it as a grown-up, I found that there were very interesting things about Babar from which one can actually take away a bit. To begin with, if you talk about Assange Begum, who was Babar's Nani. So you find that Assange Begum, as stated in the Babarnama and also gleaning from other histories, is this, that she was a very influential woman, a lot to do with, understanding of the political ups and downs of her times. And she was the wife of a man called Yunus Khan. And it so happened that once Yunus Khan was imprisoned by one of his opponents, and that fellow married Assange Begum to one of his commanders. So he gave her away to one of his commanders. And when this man approached Assange Begum, then she, with the help of her maids who were there in the room, she killed him and she cut him into tiny pieces and threw his body off the first floor of the building. And when this was reported, then that fellow said that, why did you do this? Aren't you scared that I'm going to kill you? She said that, didn't you know that I am married to Yunus Khan and Yunus Khan is still alive? So how could you have this farcical nikah of mine with anybody else? And the chap said that, well, if you don't want to live in comfort with some other man, I'll throw you in the prison with Yunus Khan. So she said, fine, I'll go to the prison with him. So there is a certain background to Babar's own understanding of how powerful or how influential the women can be. He used to also take his Nani's advice on many occasions. The other thing that we find about Babar through the Babarnama is this, that he's always very bothered about his physical illnesses because his life was always moving at such a fast pace. I mean, I don't want to go into the details that all of you may already know, that how, you know, he is going to win and lose Samarkand 3 times and he's going to lose Fargana, and he keeps fighting to get back his parental land till the time he reaches Kabul. Even when he reaches Kabul, there are a lot of challenges to do, you know, to deal with because of the Afghan tribals there and so on and so forth. So you find that basically he's always on the move. And one thing that he's very scared about is falling ill. And he falls ill a lot of times. And then he's going to tell you about all those illnesses and how they kind of, you know, slowed him down and how worrisome that situation was for him. Now, in this whole scenario, in this recording, you find that when he is reporting about one of the battles, he notices and he records that there were 2 people who were fighting, one from his side, another one from the side of his opponent, whose name was Tambal. Tambal was a Mongol who was a commander of his father, who had turned against Babar, and Babar had to fight with him for a number of years for the possession of Fargana. So he says that there were 2 guys who were fighting with each other. One man was called Samad and the other one was Shah Suwar. And he then reports that because we did not have, you know, the facility of giving first aid to our soldiers, that is why the man who was fighting from our end, he died, while the other party had an arrangement. They had doctors, they could take care of their man who had been injured, so he was saved. So that is something that he felt that it was worth noting, and he takes a note of it. The other thing that you find that he talks about is, you know, his sense of, he has a certain degree of sense of, you know, ethics. Like he feels that if there is a misfortune that befalls one, then one has to reintrospect that is one getting punished for something that we had done in the past or someone else had done in the past. That is something that he would do for others also, and he'll do it for himself as well. When he's talking about the ruler of Samarkand, whose name was Sultan Ali Mirza, he says that his dynasty fell because the Mirza was very cruel. And then he goes on to narrate that once there was a soldier whose wife was kidnapped by one of the officers of the Mirza, and the poor soldier went to complain to him. And the Mirza said that you have already lived with your wife for so many years. So how does it matter if someone has kidnapped her and he's going to stay with her for a couple of years? I mean, you should not feel bothered about it. And then Babar goes on to write that if you need to be always scared of the the ill wishes of the poor, because they have the power to actually rise up to the skies and they can bring down your downfall and so on and so forth. So he'll write a whole lot of things about that. Then there's another interesting remark that which is important, in fact, for all political decisions that people take, and also as a matter of political responsibility that leaders hold. When Samarkand was taken over by Shaybani Khan, there was a local Sufi who was actually a supporter of Babar, whose name was Khwaja Yahya Ehrari. So Khwaja Yahya Ehrari was banished from Samarkand, and he was leaving Samarkand with his 2 sons. He was a supporter of Babar, and Samarkand was at that time held by his sworn enemy Shaybani Khan. Now Khwaja Yahya Ehrari and his sons were killed on the way. And when Babar came to know of it, and he also came to know that Shaybani Khan did not take the responsibility for these murders, because he said that I did not know that who has murdered them, and I had not ordered that they should be murdered. So Babar writes in the Babarnama that I feel that once you are in a position of power, and if this kind of a lawlessness happens in your region, then as the topmost commander, you cannot say that I did not know, or I am not responsible for this. So he says that I am saddened by their death, but I am further saddened and shocked by the fact that Shaybani Khan is not ready to take the responsibility of these killings. That is something that he says. Another interesting thing that he talks about when he's thrown out from Samarkand by he runs away from Samarkand after Shaibani Khan overruns the place, and he goes around looking for help. And he says that there's a particular chieftain of a place known as Fan, and he says that, see, this fellow has he's given me the worst of the horses, the worst of the gifts possible, and if he were to give to my cousins, he would have given the best of the things. And he says that basically the idea that he conveys is this, that wealth begets wealth. So if you have wealth, people will be ready to give you more wealth. It's just like the bankers calling you all the time कि आपको loan चाहिए, and जिनको सच में loan चाहिए उनको loan मिलेगा नहीं. So that is exactly what he's talking about. And he says that this is very bad about life, that the more you have, the more people are ready to give you, and the less you have, the less people are ready to give you. So there is, a kind of philosophy that he'll go on talking about. Then, of course, we all know that he had to leave his sister Khanzada Begum, and Shaibani Nama says that Khanzada Begum was actually in love with Shaibani Khan and she wanted to marry him. That is why she stayed back. But Babar says that somehow Khanzada Begum was left behind, and he doesn't know how that happened. And he says that when he was riding the horse, he was so worried about, whether his family has actually come out from there, that he kept looking back and he fell down from the horse. And then the whole day his head was, he was spinning and he couldn't understand what was going on around him. So you have a narrative coming from him, which is quite honest, because he doesn't hesitate at all in showing his weaknesses. He does say that when he lost both Fargana and Samarkand when he was just 15, he cried. And he cried so much that he felt that ye jo aansu hain, ye kabhi bhi nahi rukenge. He felt that, he perhaps will never stop crying. He was so worked up then. And then in one of these, philosophical moments, he went on to write, he wrote that, other than my own soul, I never found a faithful friend. Other than my own heart, I never found a confidant. So you have a lot of philosophy that is going around while he narrates history to you. Another interesting narrative is this, that when he was to, attack Fargana, and he had to face his enemy Tambal, the Mongol, who was also an officer of his father earlier. He was advised by his Mongol uncles that he should send some kind of a gift to Tambal so that his heart will be softened. And Babar had a particular sword, which was made of fantastic iron, which was made by one of his friends whose name was Humayun. So he sent this talwar to Tambal as a gift. And it so happened that when Babar and Tambal, when they came face to face with each other, Tambal shot an arrow which went through Babar's thigh. And the next thing that he did was that he banged that damn sword on his head. And Babar was seriously injured after that. And this reminds me of the time when Shah Jahan had also sent a sword to Aurangzeb when he wanted to negotiate with him, which of course was also a failure. So sometimes you find that there are very, very interesting kind of parallels here and there. I don't think I have time, to go into much more of Babar, but just a couple of things. When he went to meet his cousins in Herat, he was thinking that he's going to have a alliance with them against the Uzbeks. And one of his cousins, whose name was Badiuzzama, he hosted a party. And in that, a roasted turkey was being served. And the turkey was placed before Babar. He didn't know how to dissect it, to eat it, So he didn't touch it. Badiuzzama asked, why haven't you eaten? He said that I don't know how to cut it. And Badiuzzama cut the turkey for him and he cut it very beautifully. And Babar says that I knew that Badiuzzama is very sophisticated and no one can beat him in sophistication. But at the same time, he writes that these guys are not the guys who can fight a war. So he decided, well, I can have a party or two with them, but they're not going to be my allies against the Uzbeks, because they will, it will be like this, ki hum to doobenge sanam, tumko bhi le doobenge. So he decided that I'm not going to, align with them. And then, of course, when he gives you the narrative about these parties, he would come out with, the most unexpected things that you would, you could imagine. Like, for example, he'll say that there was a particular poet there whose name was Ali Sheri. And he writes that Ali Sheri was very popular. And one day it so happened that Ali Sheri had a cold. and his nose was running. So he brought a scarf so that he could keep wiping his nose with that every now and then. And then he says that chithra which he had brought, it became a fashion, and it was known as the Ali Sheri scarf. And women also started wearing that Ali Sheri scarf. This is that he will talk about. Then, of course, we know that when he fell ill, I don't want to get into how he fell ill and what's the narrative about that. We all know about it. You find that his first worry was the marriage of his daughters Gulrang and Gulchehra. That is what we get to know from Gulbadan's account. So when you hear of this, Babar comes across as an ordinary parent, maybe not as a Badshah. He's not bothered about what is going to happen to his kingdom, who's going to inherit, what will happen to all the wealth, whatever else that he did. His first botheration is this, that my daughters are not married. His youngest son, Hindal, was not there. He wanted to really meet Hindal. That was something which was important for him. The other thing which also needs to be quickly told is this, which is very famous, that he broke all the glasses of sharab before the Battle of Khanwa, and then he raised the slogan that this is going to be a war against the against the Kafirs, and he raised the religious slogan in this. When you read the Babarnama, he says that I thought that I'll give up drinking, not because he was going to fight a war, not because there was an important war which was coming up, which of course was very important for him, because he had called Humayun all the way back from the region of Bihar, where he was dealing with the Afghans, because he felt that this war with the Rajputs is going to be important and it's going to be difficult. So he brought Humayun back from there. Not only that, he was not attending any of the social parties and gatherings which were happening before the Battle of Khanwa, because he was so busy making preparations for that particular war. So it was important for him. The other thing is that he said that I decided that I will give up drinking because I wanted to thank God for whatever he had given to me, and thus I left drinking. And then he said that because to copy me and to perhaps, to impress me, and like we find that is usually the case, that a lot of people would just follow, whatever the top shot does. So a lot of people actually stopped drinking. So when they stopped drinking, then he says that then I thought that since this has made such a, it's become a popular move. So then I thought that maybe we could turn it into something like this. And you have this thing that he's going to use, because the root of the mobilization is not there initially. I mean, it is something that's the idea that emerges later on. So he left drinking because he wanted to thank God, but he found that there is an opportunity here, so I'm going to use it. So therefore, it isn't as if that Babar is, either a hero or a villain. He is like a politician. So you find an opportunity and you use it. So he's going to use it. And well, you have this, this war in which there's a slogan which is going to be raised. All the goblets were, they were melted, and all the money which came out of there was given to charity, and so on and so forth. So the other thing which I just don't feel like letting go of is this, that when Khwaja Kalam, who was one of the good friends and one of the major commanders of Babar, he decided to leave Hindustan after the Battle of Panipat. And he wrote something to Babar, which I'm reading out to you. He says, this is Khwaja Kalam writing. He wrote that if I cross the Indus in safety, may my face turn black if I ever desire to see Hindustan again. मतलब कि अगर मैं इंडस से एक बार खैरियत से बाहर निकल गया तो मेरा मुंह काला हो जाए अगर मैं हिंदुस्तान की तरफ दोबारा पलट के देखूं. And this was something that, of course, Babar को जो है बहुत ही बुरा लगा, because he was going to make Hindustan his home. So he felt very bad about this. And he wrote back, he wrote a reply back to him. He said, give 100 thanks, O Babar, to that generous pardoner of all that he gave you Sindh and Hind and a vast kingdom. If you cannot endure the heat and say, I would see the face of cold, then there is Ghazni. And then again, he wrote another letter to Khwaja Kalam, again bringing up the same, hurt that he felt, bringing it back up again. He said, oh, you who have gone from this country of India, feeling pain and distress, you thought of Kabul and its wonderful climate and hotly left India. There you have apparently found pleasure and joy and many good things, yet we have not died. अगर तुमको वहां बहुत मजा आ रहा है तो हम भी यहाँ मर नहीं गए. So we have not died, thank God. Although we may have suffered much pain and untold grief, you have no more physical distress, but then neither do we. So you find that there is clearly, a feeling of surety that he's going to be here and he's happy at the place that he is. And soon enough, he's very sentimental about, someone speaking against Hindustan, because he's not going to reprimand that fellow once, but he's going to reprimand him twice. It's not something that he's going to let go of. He'll write a reply and he's going to send it back to him. So now I would just quickly speak about Humayun. The interesting thing about Humayun is that he is some enthusiast. I mean, somebody who is just plainly happy. तो मतलब वो जो एक कहावत है कि happy are the happy, जो खुश हैं वो खुश हैं. तो वो जो है वो, despite all the things that go wrong with his life, you find that he doesn't give up. Of course, that is apparent that he doesn't give up. And the other thing is that he is someone who has a lot of hope in believing that things will eventually turn out in his favor, because right from the word go, he had a lot of problems. There were people who were opposing him. There were a lot of people who felt that he was not good enough. If you read the Babarnama and Babar's letter to Humayun, you find that Babar himself, writes to Humayun that you should meet more people. You don't meet people. You should have a greater, circle of friends, people reliable to you. So you have to kind of widen your circle if you're thinking that you're going to become a ruler. Those are the kind of things that Babar writes to him. The other thing that, of course, he writes to him is this, that तुम जब कुछ लिखते हो तो दोबारा पढ़ के नहीं देखते हो कि क्या लिखा है. So when you write something, don't you read back over and see what you've written, because if you would have ever read what you wrote, then you would have made some corrections because you use so much of jargon. That is something that Babar actually wrote to him, which is recorded. So you find that he had his own limitations, but he didn't seem to care much. The other interesting thing that we know about him from Gulbadan Begum is that he would go overboard sometimes in displaying goodness. Of course, the whole instance about, the water carrier Nizamuddin is well known, that he had made him the ruler for a day. So he was seated on the throne and he was allowed to, distribute jagirs, and people had to come and kind of in his darbar and pay respect to him. All that happened, and Kamran Mirza, his brother, was very angry with whatever was happening. The other interesting part that Gulbadan Begum writes about is this, that Hindal Mirza had actually, declared his independence. And when Humayun arrived back at Agra alive from Bengal, and Dildar Begum, Hindal's mother, was very worried that what Humayun was going to do now, because Hindal was not even supported by Kamran in revolting against Humayun. So he practically had no support from any other of his brothers, neither Kamran nor Askari, and of course Humayun wouldn't have supported him. So when Dildar Begum wanted to take Humayun's word that he has forgiven Hindal, it is Humayun who goes and he picks up the Quran and he brings it and he says that मैं कसम खा रहा हूँ कि मैंने उसको माफ कर दिया है. You don't worry, मैं कसम खा रहा हूँ. So, you find that there is this strange kind of eagerness in him to display his goodness. And then there is another interesting instance that I would like to share with you, is that we all know that Akbar was born in Umarkot, and the Rana of Umarkot was thinking of allying with Humayun. It was going to be a political alliance. And some of Humayun's enemies were at the same time approaching Rana, dissuading him from, having this alliance. They had sent some gifts to the Rana of Umarkot. And when Humayun got to know of this, he decided that they're going to make a dog wear all the khilat which had come, so the robe which had come, all the jewels that had come. So a dog was adorned with all of that, and it was then sent back to the person who had sent those gifts. So sometimes he would have these, strange kind of ways of getting even with people. Of course, his love story with Hamida Banu Begum is well known. His zid to marry her, his hope that he is going to make it, and that he'll be able to provide her the life of a queen is, when he decided that he's going to do it, it seemed absolutely impossible. But he was sure that he's going to do it, and it somehow happened. So maybe you can say that he was plainly lucky, but he always believed that things would work out. And the other thing about Humayun is that often his development as a politician and his skill of understanding people and governance are things which are underestimated. So we need to look at his life and his decisions much more carefully, and how his decisions also change with time is again something that we need to look at much more carefully, because you find that in the later part of his life, he's much more careful in selecting people for various positions. He's a little more harsh towards his brothers, not as vulnerable as he was in the first part of it. But having said that, you also find that there's a broad change also which is happening when you compare the period of this fellow Babar and Humayun, and then you come to Shah Jahan and Aurangzeb, because Shah Jahan and Aurangzeb are going to kill people in anticipation, and you would find that Babar and Humayun would not kill people even though they openly revolted against them. So these guys are far more lenient with their relatives, more accommodating than the latter of the Mughal rulers, amongst the great Mughals themselves. So there is a broader change also that one needs to kind of look at. And right, so having said that, I don't think I have enough time to go into much more of Humayun, which I could have done, but I'm sorry. So I would just quickly come to Akbar. Now, when you think of Akbar, like I said to you, that the first thing comes to one's mind is about the Sulekul, and of course the grand title that Akbar always carried on his shoulders, because together with Ashok, the great Akbar. What I felt was that although Akbar might have been a great ruler, you find that as a parent, he was certainly failing. He was failing in many areas. And the other thing which is interesting, which I've already pointed out to, is this, that he was very shrewd. There's no doubt about it, that he was very, very shrewd. And the competitiveness that I was talking about, you find that a lot of that competitiveness is leading him to cooperation. And because if you're talking about inclusion, you find that he's selective about inclusion. It isn't as if that he would embrace everybody. We can of course give him the credit of thinking of building up a moral code which is beyond any kind of religion, but at the same time his own broadness also has its own agenda. So we need to actually get deeper into that to understand who he really was. Something that Badayuni to a certain extent is trying to do, but then Badayuni has his own limitations, because the first thing that he feels very bad about is that he presumes that the Mughal orthodoxy, the Muslim orthodoxy, should have got a place of importance in the Mughal court. That is something that he clearly feels, And the other thing that Badayuni is bugged with is this, that Akbar used him initially to dismantle the ulema. He used him initially to argue, with the ulema. And then later on, when Abul Fazl comes in, then Abul Fazl is far more smarter than what Badayuni is, perhaps. Because of course, he also has the backing of his father, Sheikh Mubarak, and his brother Faizi. So they work together like a team. So Badayuni is sidelined. And then of course, he's very bitter. So you have the emergence in the presence of Badayuni, the very fact that he exists, you have the emergence of a fantastic narrative about Akbar, a counter side of the coin which Abul Fazl is presenting you, and also a lot of gossip that we would have otherwise missed on. Now, there's one thing that I would like to, in fact, two things that I would quickly tell you about. One is that there's a narrative about the affair of a Muslim Sheikh where he falls in love with the wife of a non-Muslim bania, of a non-Muslim sunar, right? So, and this girl is called Mohini. Her name is Mohini, and she's supposed to be extremely beautiful. And Mohini also falls in love with this man, and the backdrop is such that both of them are somehow trying to reach Akbar, and they feel that if they are able to reach Akbar, they are going to be safe. So there is, this feeling that if they happen to reach him, then they are going to be safe. But of course, they are unable to reach, and then this man is going to die, and eventually that girl is also going to die after some time. So it's a tragedy. The other narrative also that we get, where you find that there is the son of a sheikh who falls in love with a dancing girl, and the family approaches Akbar and they say that you must marry her off to somebody else, otherwise this boy is going to marry her, and we don't want that disgrace for our family. So she is married to somebody else. But then that girl runs away from her husband's house, and then both the girl and this lover of hers, both of them are actually summoned to Akbar's court. And he wants to know whether that girl really loved him, and whether she wanted to marry him, and whether that was the reason why she ran away from her husband's house. And he was of the opinion that in case, if the girl also says that she loves this man, then the marriage is going to happen. But the family of the sheikh, they put their foot down that this is not happening. This man committed suicide. And then another case came up in Akbar's court, whether he is going to have a proper namaz of janaza because he had committed suicide, or the namaz-e-janaza will not happen because suicide is not permitted in Islam. And in this, the final decision that came was this, that the namaz-e-janaza was going to happen because this fellow had died after all for love. And love is something which is, in itself considered to be pure. Then there is yet another narrative, which, which says that there was a particular dancing girl whose name was Aram Jan. And Aram Jan was a girl who was with one of the senior nobles of Akbar, Khan-e-Zama. And Khan-e-Zama was in love with a man whose name was Shaheen Beg. To impress Shaheen Beg, Khan-e-Zama gave Aram Jan to Shaheen Beg. And then Shaheen Beg, after some time, presented this Aram Jan to yet another of his friends whose name was Abdur Rahman. So, this Aram Jan was first with Khan-e-Zama, then with Shaheen Beg, then with Abdur Rahman. And finally, after some time, this news reached Akbar that these guys are transferring this girl from one man to another. And they're violating, all ethics of marriage and so on and so forth. And Akbar was very angry about this. In this whole, while all this was happening, and there was a search which was going on for Shaheen Beg to punish him, you find that he went to Abdur Rahman's fief and he said that this girl originally belonged to me, so you give her back to me, which Abdur Rahman refused. And in the ensuing, confrontation, it so happened that Shaheen Beg was killed. And because Shaheen Beg was killed, Khan-e-Zama, who loved him, he was chasing to Abdur Rahman to kill him. And Abdur Rahman found shelter in Akbar's court. He was welcomed there, he was given protection there, and so on and so forth. So you find that Akbar is, he has a lot to do with everything which is going on around him. There is somehow a connection with a lot of things which are happening around him. And you also find, of course, that we all know, that he was against sati. He was intervening in the practice of sati and so on and so forth. Then, of course, we know that he said that all the slaves are going to be freed and they'll be called chelas and so on and so forth. Sulekul, of course, translation वो सब तो है ही, वो तो पता ही है हम लोगों को. उसके अलावा हम लोग एक चीज और देखते हैं that he comes under a lot of firing because of what he was doing. Now Badayuni tells us that there was a certain sifarish. There was a certain sifarish which was done by Khwaja Abdul Shahid, who was the grandson of Khwaja Abdul Ehrar, And the Mughal family, originally they were, devoted to this particular family of Sufis, but Akbar refused to listen to this sifarish because it was politically, incorrect for him to do that. So he refused. He said, "Ye hum nahi kar payenge." And then you have a narrative that Khwaja Abdul Shahid gave a baddua to Akbar, where he said that he may lose his aman, aman, and iman. All the things, so that is peace and blessing of God and faith, that he may lose all of these things. And then of course you will also have this whole controversy about using Allahu Akbar in the seal, because Akbar was advised against it, because it was said that it might create a confusion, that he wants to say that Akbar is great, and instead of Allahu Akbar he should use la zikrullahi akbarhu, which means that the remembrance of Allah is great, which he refused. He didn't use that. So he was called, that he is he's someone who's like Firaun, and he's, like the people of Shaddad, or he is like Qarun, who had revolted against Moses, and so on and so forth. So you will have a lot of allegations against him. And of course, Badayuni is, he says that jitne bhi Brahmins hain, wo charpaiyon par unko, they are lifted in the balcony where the Badshah sleeps. So it is on the higher floor. And because they cannot enter inside the haram, so then they are lifted in cots to the level of the balcony, and the Badshah keeps standing in the balcony, and he keeps talking to them, and the night passes by like that, and so on and so forth, and he says that all the, the Buddhists are there, and the Zoroastrians are there, and the Christians are there, whoever and everyone is there, and the only people whom Akbar hates is the Muslims. They are the only people whom Akbar hates. That is what he writes. He says that he has acceptance for every other faith except this faith of ours, Islam. That is what he writes. Now, when you read of this, when you read and repeatedly when you see what Badayuni is talking about, it somehow brings the memory of the Shikwa Jawab Shikwa of Iqbal, where he goes on to write exactly the kind of shikayat that Badayuni is doing about Akbar. You have the Muslims making a complaint to Allah in the Shikwa Jawab Shikwa, where they say ki teri, and he says that Muslims are barbad in Akbar's reign. That's what he says, that they are, they are ruined. And here you have this other narrative, which will come, of course, hundreds of years later, which says ki teri mehfil bhi gayi, chahne wale bhi gaye, shab ki aahein bhi gayi, subha ke naale bhi gaye, dil tujhe de bhi gaye, apna sila le bhi gaye, aake baithe bhi na the aur nikale bhi gaye, aaye us shah gaye vaadaye parda lekar, ab unhe dhoond chiraghe rukhe zeba lekar. Let me just first read out the English version to you so that you can make out what this Urdu version is saying. So it goes like this. This is the Muslims addressing Allah and complaining to him. Your mehfil is dissolved. Those who loved you are gone. No sighs through the nights of longing, no lamenting at dawn. We gave our hearts to you, took the wages you bestow, but hardly had we taken our seats, you ordered us to go. As lovers we came, as lovers departed, with promise of tomorrow. Now search for us in the light that your radiant face does glow. In the temples of idolatry, the idol says, the Muslims are gone. They rejoice that the guardians of the Kaaba have withdrawn. From the world's caravanserais, singing camel drivers have vanished. The Quran tucked under their arms, they have disappeared. These infidels smirk and snigger at us. Are you aware? For the message of your oneness, do you any more care? There are people of other faiths, some of them transgressors, some are humble, drunk with the spirit of arrogance are others, some are indolent, some ignorant, some endowed with brain, hundreds of others there are, who even despair of your name. Your blessings are showered on homes of unbelievers, strangers all. Only on the poor Muslims, your wrath like lightning falls. So one I have already spoken. I'm just speaking the other one. बुत सनम खानों में कहते हैं मुसलमान गए, है खुशी उनकी के काबे के निगहबान गए, मंजिले दहर से ऊँटों के खुदी ख्वान गए, अपनी बगलों में दबाए हुए कुरान गए, खंदाए जन कुफ्र है एहसास तुझे है कि नहीं, अपनी तौहीद का कुछ पास तुझे है कि नहीं, उम्मतें और भी हैं उनमें गुनहगार भी हैं, इज़ वाले भी हैं, मस्ते मए पिंदार भी हैं, उनमें काहिल भी हैं, गाफिल भी हैं, होशियार भी हैं, सैकड़ों हैं कि तेरे नाम से बेजार भी हैं, रहमतें हैं तेरी अगयार के काशानों पर, बर्फ गिरती है तो बेचारे मुसलमानों पर. So this is exactly the kind of complaint that Badayuni makes against Akbar. And then he himself writes that Akbar actually he says that the intra-Muslim politics is so intense and the Muslims fight amongst themselves so much, and there are so many factions against internally within them, that Akbar assumed that the Muslims of the earlier period would have been like the Muslims of his day, and therefore he decided that they all need to be dumped. Now, when again this brings me back to the Jawab from the Shikwa Jawab Shikwa, that it says that शोर है हो गए दुनिया से मुसलमान नाबूद, हम ये कहते हैं कि थे भी कहीं मुस्लिम मौजूद, बाज में तुम हो नसरा हो तमुद्दन में हुनूद, ये मुसलमान हैं जिन्हें देख के शर्माए हुनूद यहूद, यूं तो सैयद भी हो मिर्जा भी हो अफगान भी हो, तुम सभी कुछ हो बताओ कि मुसलमान भी हो. So when you think of how Badayuni rationalizes why Akbar did what he did, it all comes back to the intra-Muslim politics. And of course, we don't have to believe what Badayuni is saying, because we have to look at many other angles of what's happening in this period. So that in itself leads us to a complex debate of what Akbar chooses, why he chooses what he chooses. And of course, his liberality, and as far as the extension of generosity is concerned, it's absolutely massive and matchless. Because there is this new book, the Vrindavan Documents, if you may have had a look at it. You have some amazing farmans coming from Akbar's period, a complete declaration of the kind of inclusiveness which was prevailing in this period in time. I don't have much time to go, but I would just like to read from my book the last paragraph that I talk about Shah Jahan, and the last paragraph that I talk about Aurangzeb, because there's no time. I would have loved to talk about Jahangir also. And quickly, let me just tell you one quick thing. There is a recent song that's come, which is sung by somebody called Badshah, जिसमें line आती है कि सुना है हमने मरती है हम पे मर के दिखा. आप में से जो गाने सुनते होंगे उन्होंने सुना होगा ये गाना. There is an instance in the Tuzuk where Jahangir says that there was a case that came to his court where there was a lover who said कि आप मेरी जो है वो इससे शादी करा दीजिए, otherwise I'm going to die. And he was at the Agra fort, and there was this place called the Agra Burj, which was a high point in the fort. And Jahangir said कि you were saying कि तुम मर जाओगे, तुम मर के दिखाओ. And that man got onto the Burj and he jumped down and he died. And Jahangir writes that that is one thing that he regrets. So just very quickly, because I don't have time for this, we're running out of time. Well, Aurangzeb, while he was going to the Deccan for the second time, he'd written a letter to Shah Jahan where he pointed out to him that the Taj Mahal is leaking. It required repair, and he wrote to Shah Jahan that just in case अगर आपको वक्त मिले और आपका अगर नजरे इनायत हो, तो ये जो ताजमहल की बिल्डिंग है ये कुछ साल और चल जाएगी अगर आप ये रिपेयर इसमें करा लें. And then he also wrote that मुझे ऐसा लग रहा है जैसे इसको नजर लग गई है. And then what I have written here is that perhaps the evil eye that Aurangzeb referred to had not struck just the Taj Mahal. It had also struck the Mughal family, or perhaps it had touched the Mughal Empire itself. The unmarked black twin of the Taj Mahal that Shah Jahan had hoped to construct on the opposite bank of the Yamuna had become a metaphor for impossibilities. A metaphor for impossibilities. After all, everything is not possible, not even for the kings of the world. And if you think of Shah Jahan's life and death, there is a share that from Ghalib which comes to my mind. It goes like this, बहुत ही famous है, कि ये ना थी हमारी किस्मत की विसाले यार होता, अगर और जीते रहते तो ये इंतजार होता, मुझे क्या बुरा था मरना अगर एक बार होता, कहूँ किससे मैं कि क्या है, शबे गम बुरी बला है, मुझे क्या बुरा था मरना अगर एक बार होता. Because Shah Jahan was always a family man. And he was very bothered when once the war of succession started, he was very bothered that he should not lose his children, which he did. Thok ke hisab se he did. And he lived to, see that sorrow, lived through that sorrow. So it was a big deal. I mean, Shah Jahan's life is again a paradox of a lot of success and massive lived failure of sorrows and anxieties. As far as Aurangzeb is concerned, I'll just quickly read the last paragraph and I think I'll be done here after this. Aurangzeb was victorious and vanquished at the same time. It is unknown whether he felt like a king or a pauper. He is arrested in the paradox of having friends and foes in the present times. Indeed, all prisons are not made of stones and steel. Some are made of abstracts. The key to Aurangzeb's prison was lost way back in 1657 and is still missing. So I think with this, I would stop here. And if you have any questions, comments, you're most welcome to bring them forth. Thank you. Thank you for your patience.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Thank you for this wonderful talk. It's really very insightful for all of us, I would say. So it's really very interesting. So we have some questions. So should I read for
Yes,
you?
please do. Yes, yes.
And it would be better for everyone that those who are joined us, they can ask question directly through unmuting herself or himself. But we have some questions right now by Amit Desar. Illuminating lecture, Mughal women often played a prominent role in politics, scholarly acts, hunting, and even commerce. Do you think that it is related to the matriarchal habits of some of the Turkish tribes? Mughals were curious about pre-Islamic civilization as well. But in 21st century, North Africa, many people do not visit museums and pyramids and identify it as a Jahiliya. How can you interpret this case?
Okay, see, as far as the women are concerned, of course, there were traditions in the in the Central Asiatic political scenario where you find that women were influential, but it also has a lot to do with the personality type, because you would find that Assange Begum is very dominating and very politically very aware, but that's not the case with Babar's mother, because you don't find that she is very dominating. Kudluk Nigar Khanum is not someone who's taking part in politics or very dominating. Then you have Hamida Banu Begum, who's very dominating. But that's not the case with particularly any of Akbar's wives. I mean, you don't find any of them to be so very prominent. Noor Jahan Begum is very prominent. Mumtaz Mahal has a lot of influence on Shah Jahan, but whatever role she's playing is quite behind the scenes. Noor Jahan Begum is so very powerful also because Jahangir was very unwell in the last 5 years of his life. He was asthmatic and he was very ill. He was a drunkard. He was an addict to to substances and also drinks, and his health was failing very badly. Last 5 years he could hardly do anything on his own. So there is a lot of dependence on Noor Jahan Begum, and she is one of the only people whom he can trust. So you find that she's particularly very powerful. That's there, yeah. And then as far as you said that they took a lot of interest in history, certainly they did. So they were interested. They were interested in a lot of reading. Babar, you will find he comments. He talks about his own father, Umar Sheikh Mirza, who was very well read. He says he would comment on most of the famous classics of his times. He's also talking that how some of the classics have been copied from some earlier classics. So they are pretty well read, but they are not into orthodox ritualism of Islam. No, they aren't. They aren't.
Okay. So I think Akash Avasthi wants to ask some question. Akash, you can ask.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am, for this wonderful lecture, I would say, because the excursion brought out in front of us, it's kind of really important, right, to know such things that are coming out of the court when the emperors are considered to be entities who are so powerful, immovable kind of things that are attached to them. So I have a question related to the history of emotions that has garnered so much attention lately, especially when Margaret Purno has written something about it. And it is mostly based on the 18th and the 19th century. We are not going back through it. So if we try to read Babarnama through it, right, or the small excerpts that you have put forward in front of us related to Humayun, related to Akbar, related to Jahangir, and even Aurangzeb, as you told us about the leaking Taj Mahal kind of thing. So what do you think that what should be the methodology, or what should be the way that we should treat it? Because obviously Asfar Moin and people have mentioned about the multifarious facets of Babar, but they have not dealt with the emotional quality that his works brings in front of us. So maybe something on that.
Well, I think this is an area that really needs attention, because it breaks a number of stereotypes, like I said earlier as well, because that puts everybody into a separate space when you're looking at their emotional side. And as far as how I would think of approaching is that you need to read all the sources in original and actually take down notes and see if there is a repetitive pattern in in a behavior. Only then you can establish that this person had this kind of a personality. So you will have to actually mix the study up with psychology and then go ahead with this. So some basics of psychology and then putting this together. Like, for example, you spoke about how you get to see the other side of them. I'll give you an example from Aurangzeb. One of the foreign travelers reports that in the latter part of his life, when Aurangzeb had become overtly religious, he was supposed to spend a night with one of the renowned women of the times, and that woman really dressed up for the night, and she was very looking forward very much to being with the Badsha. It was a big night for her, and she went there. And in the morning, when the eunuchs came, when there was this Fajr namaz time, and the eunuchs came and they said that it's time for you to have the ritual bath and then offer the namaz. And this woman was at that point packing her things up and walking out of the room. And she made a remark on Aurangzeb and said that he doesn't need a bath. He is as clean as he was. That is that he did not cohabit with her, and he just kept reading the Quran the whole night. But when she said it with a smirk and kind of looking down upon him. And then the narrative goes on to say that Aurangzeb was thoroughly embarrassed by this remark. So this is a very minor, very small, tiny incident, which somehow gives a side of the emperor, or maybe somebody who thought that the emperor could be embarrassed by a narrative like this. So it's a very complex area to get into, but I think wonderful and absolutely worth a try.
Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am.
If I can quickly come in to say that I saw a couple of good questions in the chat box. I don't know whether you noticed it. One is about the usual Hindu-Muslim question about how the Mughals were able to manage the large majority of non-Muslim population, even though they were continuously invoking their own Muslimness, the Mughals. And this is Lalita Sharma. And the second question is by Madhumita Sen Gupta on what do you mean by when you say that understanding, the key to understanding Aurangzeb is lost. So if I add the third question to this, I would say that, in terms of religious justification of the political, and the legitimacy. The fact of the matter is that not only Aurangzeb, but even Akbar could not actually come out of the clutches of religious, pressures of different kinds. So even though the Sunni Muslim orthodoxy might have been sidelined, marginalized, but the fact is that religion remains very, very important for the Mughals, and this is a problem that the Mughal polity in terms of secularization could not complete it, and therefore remain bogged down to it, which is reflected in Aurangzeb, which is reflected in our polity down to the 21st century. Now that religion remains very, very important, and secularization of the public life, the political, and personalization, privatization of religion did not happen. But how did the Mughals manage the diversity, religious diversity, and the contradiction and changes between, say, from Babar, Humayun, and Akbar on the one hand to Aurangzeb on the other? You have said lots of things on it, but if you want to respond to these again, maybe it will be good.
Yes, thank you for those questions. See, responding to the first one, that how did they manage such a large, non-Muslim population? How did they govern them? The important part is this: when you have a change in the rulers, basically, the change is from the top, because there is nothing which is changing as far as the administration is concerned, because a part of the administration was as it is the same. So there is a change which is at the topmost layer of governance and decision making. The rest of the things remain the same. People who are exploited, they continue to be exploited, because if you read about exploitation in the agrarian sector, it will be there right from the time that agriculture started. There is exploitation. It never changes at all. So the change is only of this, that who is exploiting. So that for the common man, then in that sense, nothing changes, whether it's the Mughals who are ruling them or whoever is ruling them. There would have been a challenge if they thought that maybe they have to interfere into the religious life of people at the grassroots level, and maybe have some demands on them in that sense. But those kind of demands would certainly not come. They didn't come from any of the rulers, whether they are the sultans or the Mughals, because even if you find that there is a narrative that there was a demand like that, it's an exaggerated narrative. There really wasn't any demand. They were all much more interested in political power and economic gains than anything else. These guys are not professors of Islam. They don't have anything much to do with the kind of professing of Islam that you might expect from the orthodox elements who are into preaching Islam. They're not preachers of Islam. They're doing their own thing. So and they are incorporating the upper premier layer anyways into their system whenever possible. Because if you read about the kind of concessions that Akbar is going to give to the powerful zamindars in Gujarat, you find that his policy towards all the elements is also not the same. He's also making selection and deciding that what is the pitch at which he is going to reach an agreement with a certain group. So he's, of course, very, very, very smart and very chalu in this way. So how to maintain this balance? And like Razi, you said, that the orthodoxy, the Sunni orthodoxy was sidelined, but you still find that it was difficult for the Mughals to navigate their way through the Muslim orthodoxy kind of, being bugged off with them. And also at the same time, they're not being entirely accepted by the others also. So that, of course, that is going to be a problem always. In this, again, there is a very interesting incident that comes from Akbar's period, because he used to invite the Sufis to have a chat with them. So there was a particular Sufi who didn't want to meet Akbar, because he thought कि ये मुझसे जो है वो uncomfortable questions पूछेंगे, and I don't want to answer those questions. So when he went to Akbar's court, Akbar asked him a question. इसके बारे में आपकी क्या राय? क्या कह रहे हैं? सुनाई नहीं पड़ रहा है. I can't hear you. Akbar said, well, I give you a gold coin. I really like your answer. Then he asked another question. That fellow again said, सुनाई नहीं पड़ रहा है. Another gold coin. But I really liked your answer, And he kept doing that. He kept asking questions. The fellow kept saying, मुझे सुनाई नहीं पड़ रहा है. He kept giving him a gold coin. And then finally he said, ठीक है, you go. I have allotted you a jagir. You can leave now. So he clearly is using, a lot of diplomacy, caution, in dealing with these people. So on the one hand, he's strict because they have to come and report. But on the other hand, it's not necessary that they will answer his questions, or they will answer his questions in such a way that pleases him. So of course, it's a very interesting kind of a situation. And the deeper that we go into it, the more interesting it gets. And as far as the key to Aurangzeb is concerned, I think that people have been looking for the key for quite some time. And whenever someone finds a key, some other party says that this is not the correct key. This doesn't fit into the lock. So that's it. Because, you know, when Athar Ali was writing, he thought that, well, he's got, when Jadunath Sarkar was writing, he said, कि हाँ भाई अब कुंजी हमें मिल गई है. When Athar Ali was writing about Aurangzeb, he said कि हाँ हमें मिल गई है. अब वो कोई और कहता है कि अब हमको मिल गई है. So I think the debate goes on. And I think that's what the fun of history is, that the debate never ends.
Okay. So is there any more questions? Anybody who wants to ask can ask your question. I think we have to bind up. So, okay, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you so much for this wonderful talk. I really thoroughly enjoyed it, and it's a very informative and very fruitful for us to having with you. So I would like to thank you and the chair of this session, Dr. Razguddin Akil sir, for having with us. So next, our next talk will be on 25th of August by Professor Max Dick. So stay with us and stay tuned. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me over. Bye-bye.